Revelation 16 completed the cycle of 7 plagues by which God was revealing the full extent of his wrath against the sin of the inhabitants of the earth. You remember how I defined that as people who are basically myopic in vision, earthbound in their sense of reality, and who are followers of the beast and all the values of the kingdom of the kingdoms of the beast. But anyway, the last plague of the previous scene simply states that the world, meaning human society, that's orientated away from God and the values of God's realm, is destroyed. And it's in this fifth act of the drama that we discover how that comes about. And I've called this, which is really the sort of introduction in the opening scene for the fifth act, I've called it Fatal Attraction and the Need for 6-6 Vision. First of all, John sees something, and it's a mystery. What he sees is the appearance of a woman, a whore, and then there's the explanation of what God sees, John sees, and that's given in what John hears. So once again, we're hearing, interpreting the vision. And we therefore discover the nature of the beast and also the instruments by which it is destroyed. So let's read of what John sees, which is recorded in the first 6 verses. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore, who is seated on so many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of those whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication, and on her head was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of the earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. And when I saw her, I was greatly amazed. Chapter 17 begins with the words "come" and "in the spirit," which signals the fact that we are actually moving into the next act of the drama. Which we find similar words in right the way through the book. So Babylon, which actually functions as the symbolic name for world domination systems, is the parody and mirror image of the holy city, the New Jerusalem, which we will finally see established on the earth when we come to the final act of the book. So, of the drama, I should say. So in John's day, of course, the Babylon was incarnated by the Roman Empire. But it was quite common in Jewish prophetic tradition to portray a city as a woman. So Jerusalem was pictured as a virgin in Isaiah 37 and Lamentations chapter 2, the faithful wife and mother in Isaiah 66, a married woman who became unfaithful in Ezekiel 16, Nineveh and Tyre as harlots in Nahum and another chapter of Isaiah, chapter 23. So anyway, chapter 12 showed us a woman representing the inner life of the church, which was taken to safety in the desert, you remember. So the desert is actually a place of protection and of testing and also of reproduction for the church. So here, John, as a representative of the woman, is carried away into the desert where he meets a seductively attractive woman that is in great danger of leading many in the church or the followers of Jesus Christ astray. And she is the satanic counterpart of the woman we saw in chapter 12. Incidentally, that relates to the temptations of Christ in the desert, where the propositions of Satan, who presented him with an alternative route to power that would bypass the cross. And it's in the desert that John gains the true perspective on the inner nature of this woman, outwardly so attractive, inwardly so seductive and dangerous. He does so by listening to God's word conveyed by the messenger. Once again, what John sees is interpreted by what he hears. Now, Jeremiah 51 is a key Old Testament passage that lies behind this scene. You'll have to read it in your own time if you want to. But whilst what was spoken in Jeremiah was about the actual Babylonian Empire, it is the Roman Empire that's the context of this vision. And we find many allusions to the fact in this passage, such as the seven hills on which Rome was built. And nevertheless, the vision is always current. We ourselves are in danger of being fatally attracted by the lure of the materialism and power in the 21st century, as indeed the early church to whom John first wrote these words. Well, at the time when the seer saw and recorded the vision, this woman is embodied in Rome, which incidentally was built on seven hills, and we can see that referred to in verse 9. In our day, well, we have to think about where she is embodied in our day, and it's in the West maybe as well. So she is actually a parody, as I've said, of the woman of Revelation 12, who represents the inner life of the church, the bride of Christ. And we're going to be coming to the marriage feast in the next act of the book. Now, as the bride and the New Jerusalem are one and the same in Revelation 21, so are the great prostitute and Babylon, the latter being a parody of the former. So even her clothing and adornments are only a parody of the glorious apparel of the woman that will be the bride of the Lamb, as we saw in chapter 12, the beginning of chapter 12. So the adultery to which she seduces the kings of the earth is spiritual and moral rather than physical. It consists of the worship of the created in place of the Creator, and the nature of her adulteries is elaborated in the next chapter, chapter 18, where we find that it is commerce and the worship of mammon or worldly wealth. Consumerism, capitalism even. So how modern this all sounds. An attitude and behavior of the church in relation to worldly wealth is actually a real test of its faith. Now, a different attitude and behavior in relation to these things is not tolerated by the world, and it may lead to persecution and even death. So in verse 6, the primary reference may have been to Nero's persecution when the people of Rome watched the death of Christians as a support. I don't know. But of course it has happened in many different ways as well. Well, John sees a glamorous, seductive woman, but he hears all about the beast on which she rides, because God uses it as his means of punishing the woman for her adulteries and her enjoyment in the murder of God's witnesses. So verse 1 is actually talking about what happens later in the chapter, in verse 16. We'll come to that. So once again, what is seen, the outward appearance, is interpreted by what John hears, so that the inner nature of a personality or situation can be discerned. But the key question is, how can we gain the corrective perspective? So what is the real nature of the beast? Well, substance, actually, it's unreality. You could say just no substance at all. The phrase is in verse 8, one who is not, as opposed to that of the Lamb, whose substance is reality itself. One who is, that's in Revelation chapter 1, at the initial vision of the cosmic Christ. So even though it looks very substantial, it's very unsubstantial. This is not to deny the reality of evil, but to assert that it exists only in negativity. That was, I think, a view of evil that Karl Barth had explored extensively in his commentaries. So anyway, the second aspect of it, the nature of the beast, is its origin, and its origin is the bottomless pit or the abyss, as opposed to heaven. So even though it looks angelic, it is actually not. Its origin is the collective unconscious, that is the shadow of the human psyche into which all drains all the evil that we humans don't want to admit is part of us. And of course, then we come to its destiny, which is actually destruction, as opposed to Christ, the coming one, who is coming to reign. So even though it looks as though it's overcoming the saints, its ultimate destiny is destruction. We'll come to that later in the video. So, but it's very difficult to see Rome or our own civilization, for that matter, in bestial terms. Firstly, because of the wonders of it coming to life again, maybe a resurrection, something to do with Nero there, which I won't go into. But secondly, because at the time of writing in these days, of course in these days, it is not, which is a phrase in verse 8. That is, it is not openly showing its true colours. So we are therefore only seeing the attractive side rather than the beastly side of it. Hence the call for wisdom in verse 9, which is actually a repeat of what it says in Revelation 13, verse 18. So now we look at the significance of the numbers, and it's in verse 9, this calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated, as a reference to Rome. Also there are 7 kings, of whom 5 have fallen, 1 is living, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain for only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. Now the significance of the 8th king, the beast who was and now is not, lies in the fact that he belongs to the 7. 8 symbolizes transcendence, since 888 is the number of Christ, which I think I explained a little bit about when we were talking about the 666 in chapter 13. So the true 8th king is the one who is the firstborn of the dead. Revelation 1:5 and verse 17, the first and the last. So this one, the 8th king, makes a claim to be the Christ, but is in reality only 666. That is a parody, and is incomplete in himself. He belongs to the 7. He's one of the old firm. Its power is only borrowed power, and its existence is as dependent on the ultimate being as any other human being. The warning to us is that all who follow that king will also follow it to its destruction. John is presenting the emperors as a symbolic 7 and placing himself and his readers at the 6th for symbolic reasons. At the 6th trumpet and at the 6th bowl of God's wrath, forces are gathered for the final showdown, while the 7th trumpet and the 7th bowl each depict a short but crucial moment of crisis leading into that final showdown. Now John's churches, the ones he has written to in the letters, are not yet at the moment of crisis, but in the approach to it, on which the outcome depends. So if they do not keep awake now, when it comes to the crisis, they'll be among the earth dwellers captivated by the beast, the Antichrist, that they haven't yet discerned, to see whose real nature they haven't yet discerned. And one is reminded of what happened to the disciples, by the way, at Gethsemane. They fell asleep before Jesus was captured, you remember? That's just referencing Sweet, who I've quoted a paragraph of his there, or adapted it rather. Moving on to verse 12, and the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. And they will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and those with him are called the chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters that you saw, where the whore is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they are, and the beast will hate the whore, and they will make her desolate and naked, and they will devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. for God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. We are now shown the means that God uses to punish the great prostitute, worldly society and culture. These turn out, amazingly, to be none other than the beast itself and the 10 horns of that beast. In other words, evil in the end destroys itself, and this truth, of course, has been illustrated many times in history. How does evil destroy itself? Well, firstly, by attacking itself. Who are these 10 horns, or what kings do they represent? Not the kings of the earth who are intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries in verse 2, nor the line of emperors, the 7 heads of the beast. Daniel's 4th beast had 10 horns representing the kings that followed Alexander the Great. But John's beast is a composite of the 4 and embodies all human arrogance and rebellion against God institutionalized in the structures of human governments. It has a demonic element and can include forces from outside the civilized Roman world, as it happened with the Roman Empire. So historically, there were those forces that attacked and conquered the Roman Empire, such as the Parthians. But spiritually, they're related to the rulers of the Roman Empire, since both draw their power from the beast and Satan. And that is why revolutions or conquests do not change the fact of oppression and injustice. They simply change those who wield the power. The hatred of the beast for the prostitute is contrasted by true love of Christ for his bride. The characteristic of Satan's kingdom is self-interest, and so they will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. And you can see a reference to Ezekiel there, a prophecy spoken against the people of Jerusalem who had prostituted themselves in worship to foreign gods. Now notice how God uses the forces of darkness to unwittingly accomplish his purpose. Secondly, they destroy the beast by attacking the life source on which they must depend. So the forces of evil, being of one mind, it says they are united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. These unite and are allowed to attack the Lamb and his followers for a very short while, 1 hour. For example, we see something similar in chapter 11, verse 7 to 10, and chapter 13, verse 7. But because their power is only a derived power, and because they attack, the attack is on the very source of all power, their attack is actually ultimately self-defeating. So in conclusion, what is the message for us as followers of Jesus? Well, firstly, the danger of being seduced by the beauty and glory of this world. A quote from, I think his name is Dennis Lennon: "Seduction is not a process we can easily catch happening to us, which is why it is seduction. More than Rome's brute strength, John feared her powers of attraction. After all, a legion you can see coming, but who can detect a fascinating possibility creeping into one's mind?" Secondly, the desert is the place where spells are broken and eyesight is healed. So, of course, Jesus himself saw that very clearly in the temptations he received in the desert. Only when the church is in the desert with Jesus does it see the prostitute in her true colours. And it was the desert that saved John, and even he was almost taken as he marvelled at what he saw. So I think we need to think about this, apply it. Another quote from Dennis Lennon: "Familiarity breeds consent." Thirdly, in case we're taken in by the power of the world, John is warning us in verses 9 to 18 of the fragility and temporary nature of that power. The real power lies not with Rome or any of her successors, but with Christ, who is Lord of Lords and King of Kings, verse 14. So this is not something that is only going to become real at some time in the future. It is real now, but it is hidden. It's revealed to us through the Holy Spirit, and we see evidence of this with the eyes of faith by which we see events in their true light.